It's a huge honor to be here this morning, and I was really excited to be amidst this audience. There is a fascinating group of people here assembled from more than 20 countries, and what I wanted to be able to speak to a little bit this morning was reimagining international relations in a networked world. If I could also ask if we could reset the clock, the countdown clock here, that would be great. When I think about the people who are here today, I think about people who are engaged in a struggle. And a struggle that, while the people here are very networked and very 21st century, I would argue that the struggle that you are all involved in actually goes back 2,300 years. And this is a struggle between open and closed societies. Barack Obama recently gave a speech at the United Nations which was overwhelmingly dominated by discussion about the Middle East peace process. But he said something that's incredibly important and that I think that goes to the heart of the spirit of the Personal Democracy Forum, where he said, the strongest foundation for human progress lies in open economies, open societies, and open government. And when we say an open society, what do we mean? What I mean when I say this is people from all social and economic strata can compete and succeed economically. It's not just confined to the elites. It means that there's social and cultural pluralism. There's peaceful coexistence as opposed to social, cultural, and religious norms being determined from on high. And it also means that there's a participatory democracy as opposed to totalitarianism or a closed political system. And when I think about the people who are here today, I think about people who are on the fore of this fight between open versus closed. And when I think about how far back this dates, I think back to literally the 3rd century BC in Alexandria. If you look up on the wall here, there are, with the names that are ringed around there, Galileo, Watt, Newton, Hippocrates. There are two names that stick out to me there this morning, Archimedes and Euclid. And the reason that those two names stick out to me is they both came from the 3rd century BC in Alexandria. It was in the 3rd century BC in Alexandria that the world experienced its first truly open society, where there were people from all different religions coexisting, where there was scientific and technological vibrancy, and where there was open political dialogue and dissent. It was there that the roots of modern chemistry first took root. It was there that alchemy first took root. And it was there at the Library of Alexandria where Archimedes and Euclid established the first foundations of geometry. Now, another characteristic, though, of this open society is political dissent, political satire. And this was something that was endemic to the 3rd century BC in Alexandria. And for hundreds of years, this was done in the open and it was competitive, but it was largely, nobody died from it. Until the year 215 AD, when the Emperor Caracalla came visiting. And he saw himself satirized on wall art. And when he saw this, he grew so enraged that he ordered that every Alexandrian male of combat age and younger be put to death. And that, for all intents and purposes, in the year 215 AD, put an end to the open society that was Alexandria. And so too, the intellectual vibrancy that actually had people get their names on the wall at the University of Bologna. We see this litigation taking place time and time again. It happened again in 1441 when another name on the wall, Gutenberg, invented the printing press. Nothing did more to open society than the creation of the printing press. If you think about it, for the hundreds of years that preceded it, Europe was in what many people called the Dark Ages. A complete lack of technological progress, a complete lack of social progress, a closed theocracy, not just having intellectual and spiritual hegemony, but also political hegemony. And the printing press did a remarkable amount to open up this society, to open up knowledge. It was from thence that the Age of Enlightenment started, that people began to think a little differently about religion, and things like the Protestant Reformation started. And it was an opening up of society in ways that hadn't happened before. However, in Spain was one of literally hundreds of examples of what happened in the few hundred years that followed the printing press, the fighting against the open society. In the 15th century, where we are today in Barcelona, there was a remarkable coming together of Jews, of Muslims, and of Christians. But in 1478, as society was getting more and more open, the incumbent interests, the establishment, fought against this, lashed back against it with the Spanish Inquisition. The open society that was this part of the world where Moorish, Jewish, and Christian societies could coexist, the Catholic Church said, we are going to fight against this open society. We are not going to allow it. That is one of more examples that I could tell in a day of the constant conflict between open and closed. Today, when I think of this audience, I think of people who are on the front lines of the struggle in this battle between open and closed. The difference in 2010 is that we now live in a networked world. So you, as citizens, have tools that were previously unimaginable. And there's been this enormous disruption created by connection technologies. And when I say connection technologies, I mean tools that connect people to information and to each other, inclusive of mobile handsets, social media, the internet. I first went to work at the Obama administration about a year and a half ago, literally just under a year and a half ago, and there were 4.1 billion mobile handsets on the planet. 1.5 years later, there are 5 billion. So an almost 20% increase in 1 year, and 75% of that increase has taken place in the developing world. There are now 2 billion internet users the world around, and the slope on the graph of increased penetration is going like this. So the fact that we live in a networked world means that we can do things the likes of which we never could before. Now, I should say that it's very important to be clear-eyed. You know, cyber utopians and cyber skeptics drive me equally bananas. You know, you can't just sprinkle the internet on a problem and we all grow up to be healthy, wealthy, and wise. But those people who say, oh no, you can't control what's on the internet. Oh no, bad people can use the internet. Oh no, it's a scary place. Oh no, it's not changing anything. I mean, it's sort of the modern day flat earth society. So it's important to have a balanced point of view about what the power is, but also what the limitations are of these tools. And I would point very quickly to 2 examples that I think illustrate both the power and limitation of connection technologies. First, Haiti. In the hours after the earthquake in Haiti, members of our innovation team, a group of women, 2 Katies and a Caitlin, got the idea of using SMS, text messaging, to do an immediate relief effort for people who are suffering from, who are immediately going to suffer from the impact of the earthquake in Haiti. And over the course of 2 to 3 weeks, more than 3 million Americans donated in $10 increments to earthquake relief. So literally in 2 weeks, more than $30 million were raised from more than 3 million Americans in $10 increments. That's absolutely spectacular. That shows the power of connection technologies. Now, what's the limitation? The limitation is that having now raised this money, actually building a viable economic foundation for Haiti is going to be a spectacularly difficult challenge. And we aren't going to be able to text message our way into economic prosperity for Haiti. Another example is Iran. There's this big debate going on right now about, the role of Twitter in Iran. And it's breathless on both sides, and I think both sides are largely wrong. On the one hand are those people who believe that the Iranian government was nearly overturned by Twitter. That's wrong. That's naive. On the other hand, there are these people who believe that Twitter played no role, and that if anything, its role was malignant. That's wrong. That's naive. The truth of the matter is that where Twitter proved to be most useful was principally in sharing information with the outside world, and that then playing a role mobilizing the outside world. So when Twitter was used in Iran, the wrong way of thinking about it was as a tool of revolution, but rather thinking of it as a tool of information sharing, and information sharing itself is remarkably important. So you can see in both Haiti and Iran both the promise as well as the limitations of technology. These two technologies, Twitter and Facebook, get an enormous amount of attention, an enormous amount of media, and deservedly so. They're very important tools, and I personally use them a lot. But I think it's equally important for those of you who are here today to think about the other tools that are out there that are similarly powerful, that may not get as much media, but think, for example, about the power of tablets to deliver education in Africa. Places where they can't build new schools and where they can't necessarily afford $60 textbooks, but if we can get low-cost tablets into the hands of people, then it can be remarkably powerful. One of the things that I'm most excited about is WeGov. Moving e-government from the provisioning of government services online to putting citizens, to putting constituents at the center of their interactions with government, and having citizens actually drive the behavior of government. One really cool example, when I think about citizens driving the behavior of politics and of government, is something that the Personal Democracy Forum is doing, 10 Questions, where you can see what the Personal Democracy Forum is doing is by putting citizens at the center of the dialogue, and by letting them decide what is important, we can then change the mentality. We can break down what in the United States we call the Beltway mentality that dominates the political dialogue. In foreign policy terms, in international relations in the United States, we call this 21st century statecraft. Figuring out how we can connect people to people, people to government, and government to people. Now, we've had a lot of success, I would argue, in the first 18 months. But what's, I think, particularly exciting is really that we are on Chapter 1, Page 1 of the future of WeGov. It's Chapter 1, Page 1 of the intersection between our global communications networks and activism. The most recent examples that people point to, things like text messaging for earthquake relief, or electing Barack Obama president in part on the strength of that campaign's use of social media, most of them are 2, 3, 4 years old. And we can only begin to imagine what the power and impact of these things are going to be in future years. Just go down. It's okay. think the battery died. I noticed we were on reserve battery power before. Just last week, one story that I wanted to share about how we're on chapter 1, page 1 here, something remarkable happened in Syria. If there's any place where the conflict between open and closed is playing out on a day-to-day basis, it's in Syria. Syria, like very few nations, like North Korea and like few others, is a place that has real command and control over its citizens' access to information. I and a friend of mine, a colleague, Jared Cohen, went to Syria a couple months ago, in a trip that was criticized by many because we were going to a totalitarian state. And what we were trying to do was actually play a role helping to bring technology into the society so that people could connect to information and to resources. And there was some skepticism, but then over the last 2 weeks, something remarkable has played out. Facebook, which is banned in Syria. You aren't allowed to use it, but it's widely accessed through proxies. Somebody in a classroom using a cell phone caught an image of a teacher beating their children. Facebook campaigns started, and people from all over Syria were absolutely positively outraged by this. And several thousand people, including several thousand Syrians, voiced their support for removing the teachers from the classroom and for the government doing something. And then about a week ago, the Syrian government announced that it was going to do just that. So there was literally a Facebook-based campaign in Syria that moved the government. This is a thing of real significance, and it's a thing of real significance in the history of social media. Now, there's going to be continued opposition to this, whether that's Emperor Caracalla, whether it's the Spanish Inquisition. There's always going to be a constituency of people who push back against openness. And when I think today about those people who would tell you that you are powerless, or people who would tell you that these technologies cannot be used for good but can only be used for ill, the person who leaps to mind for me is Joseph Stalin, who said, "We would not let our enemies have guns. Why should we let them have ideas?" The Personal Democracy Forum, to my thinking, is part of the offensive against this kind of Stalinist point of view, which is that information and technology are something to be throttled back rather than shared. There have been 2,300 years of opposition to openness. You are all a part of this struggle. So please know that you are on the right side of history, that we will continue to make progress, and it's at fora precisely like this one where that kind of progress can be shared and celebrated and then scaled. Thank you so much.